Howdy YouTube family, it's Bolt RN coming to you again, if by the pool this time. See? Whew. It is hot, hot, hot outside. So, I'm cooling off at the pool and got another topic for you. Another thing that people ask me about and I'm going to discuss for you today. Today, we'll talk about getting floated. That as a nurse, if you're still a nursing student, you don't probably know what this means. Any actual nurse will know what getting floated means, and it's the bane of our existence. None of us like it, and it's a topic you have to deal with in the travel nurse world. So I'll tell you the best way to deal with it and how to keep the best attitude about it. The first thing you need to know about floating is it's an inevitability. In nursing, it's going to happen. You're going to deal with it. It's not going to be your favorite thing. Let me give you the definition of floating in case you don't know. It means you're a nurse who works in a certain department, say the ICU in my case, and there are not enough patients or maybe too many nurses on that floor that day. So what hospital administration will do is they will pull you as a nurse on that unit. They'll pull you to another unit that's probably short, probably due to the manager's own lack of scheduling properly is usually what's happened. Sometimes it's freak illnesses that hit multiple people and things like that and leaves their unit short. And in that case, you feel bad for them, you want to help them out. But sadly, from my experience, a lot of times what you'll find is that the staffing has got a problem on that unit because the manager just is not staffing properly. They're either not hiring enough nurses to save money for their unit, because it costs money to pay for nurses' salary, or they just were negligent in the way they were scheduling people and didn't even notice that they put way too few nurses on a certain day to work, and they just didn't schedule enough people, and they don't bother to have a backup call list or anything like that to pull from. So what they'll just do is they'll just pull a nurse who's not oriented to that unit or is not accustomed to working that floor, and they'll pull them and put them on that new floor. So that's a problem, but it's one that you'll deal with. So I'll tell you a little bit of how you can get around that. As a travel nurse, you're going to be the first one to get pulled. That's the stakes of it. You get paid usually a little bit more than the staff nurses, and so they look at you like you're the guy who can fill any hole that they've got in that hospital. If they're short on a step-down unit and you're an ICU nurse, they will pull you to that step-down unit before they will pull any of the other regular staff nurses, which makes sense, I guess, technically, because they're staff nurses. They've been there a long time. They want to make their staff nurses happy. It doesn't really mean that it's right that they're pulling you as a travel nurse and putting you in a situation that you're not oriented to and that you didn't really sign up or agree to work on that floor. They're just pulling you there to fill in that gap. But the truth is they're going to pull one of you, either staff nurse or the travel nurse. You will always lose as the travel nurse. You will be the first pulled. And usually as a staff nurse, there's a rotation schedule of the nurses who get pulled. So say, Tom gets pulled on Tuesday. Well, Will get pulled on Wednesday, and Susie will get pulled on Thursday, and then it'll rotate back again. You see what I mean? So everyone's getting their rotation, their turn of having to get pulled. That's how it works for staff nurses. For travel nurses, it doesn't matter if you work with Tom, Susie, and Will every day, and you're in that group, you're the fourth one in that rotation, you will be pulled every day, and they won't get pulled at all. It'll be you over and over again, and there's nothing you can really do about it. Well, I shouldn't say nothing. There are some things you can do about it. The first thing that you can do about it is when you're making up your contract, you can simply put in there, in your contract that you're making, that you are not a pullable nurse, that you're not in the float pool, that you're not working any unit other than the unit you're oriented to and the unit you agreed to work. So say you were interviewed for the ICU, you specialize in the ICU or surgery or labor and delivery or whatever unit you work. You write into your contract, or you have your agent write into your contract, that you are willing to work that unit and that unit only. You're not staffing the other floors and the other units, and that you will not be pulled. Now, when you do this, you are opening yourself up for having your contract rejected from probably most hospitals, because as a travel nurse, hospitals are going to be looking for a nurse who's willing to be flexible, who's willing to float to different places, who's willing to be a team player. And ultimately, the way it overall looks to management, when you say, I'm not willing to float, they look at it like, this guy's not a team player, this guy is not interested in being helpful to our hospital, so they'll probably pass you up and go with another travel nurse. Not guaranteed. They may still take you. There's no guarantee that they would pass you up, but you're putting a major red flag on your file, and you may not get hired. Alright guys, so a little change of scenery. Got a little too hot up there, so I'm down here by the water. But so the last and final thing that you can do, which is a little more politically correct and probably a smarter idea, it's usually what I do when I go to interview for a new contract with the manager over the phone. Before you're accepted, you have to interview over the phone. And you ask the manager, like, hey, what kind of units do we cover in the ICU? Is it common for your nurses to float out of the ICU to the other units? If I'm expected to float, where would you want me to float to? Where do you expect me? You kind of figure out what their expectations are, because if they tell you up front over the phone, hey, we're going to need a lot of help on this step-down floor, and this telemetry floor, they need a lot of help too. You kind of know right off the cuff there, they're probably going to expect you to float around, and they probably will use you to float around. So you have to decide, is that okay? Are you okay doing that? Some places are not as upfront and honest as they should be, and you kind of have to ask around different questions like, what's your staffing like currently? Because if their staffing is not that bad, say in their ICU, if they're only short 2 nurses, then you'll probably end up floating around, because if they're only short 2 nurses, they probably will have a few different days that they don't need you, and that means you're contracted, so they've got to pay you to work at least a certain number of hours per week. So they're not just going to send you home. They'll send you to a med-surg floor or wherever they got to send you, so that you have to work your certain guaranteed hours, because again, you're contracted. So that means you have to work those minimum number of hours, and they have to pay you those minimum number of hours. Some contracts have little caveat rules and stuff, like you can be called off 2 times during your contract and they don't have to pay you for that, things like that. But that's dependent from contract to contract. Overall, your contract means they have to enforce you getting to work a certain number of hours that you're given on your contract. So if you're guaranteed 36 hours a week, then they've got to work you 36 hours a week. If they're only short 2 nurses in their ICU, then at some point they probably will have a low census of patients, and they won't need a full load of nurses, and that means you can't just go home and get paid for free. You're going to go to a floor and you'll help out that floor. So that's one way you can ask around, like, how short are you? Because if they're really short on ICU nurses, it's unlikely that they'll ever not need you during the time you're there. So that's some questions you can ask them. Usually they'll be upfront and honest with you. Sometimes you'll find them kind of beating around the bush and not directly answering you, and that's a red flag. If they're not directly answering your questions about floating and about how often you'll be in the ICU or med-surg or wherever you're at, there's your major red flag. Just know going into it, you probably will be floated around, and you probably are not going to like that. The final tip that I can give you guys is be careful of your specialty. Some specialties are more floatable per se than others. So say you choose to work med-surg, or you choose to work like an oncology med-surg unit, or there's a lot of different units out there that are like orthopedic med-surg or cardiac med-surg or telemetry med-surg or whatever. Essentially it means you take more than 2 patients. You take a patient load of 4 to 6 people, sometimes maybe 8. If you work on those kind of floors, then you're going to be highly likely you're going to get floated around. My buddy that travel nurses down here to Corpus Christi with me, he actually is a med-surg nurse, and it's extremely common for him to walk in and be said, hey, you're going to be on this other floor today. They kind of use you as those type of nurses. They use you very interchangeably from their floor to floor, because They figured, you know, it's kind of the same thing that you're doing. It's not too much different. There's nothing super special about the equipment or machinery that you're using from floor to floor on those type units. And usually the charting is very similar to the way you do on the other units. So in those situations, you're very likely that you're going to get floated around, and there's not much you can do about it. Just go in expecting you're going to get floated around. If you're a specialty nurse, labor and delivery, nursery nurses, if you work surgery, PACU, ICU, your likelihood of being floated around is a lot less. You don't, ICU, you still may get floated around because, in ER as well, because sometimes hospitals look at ER and ICU as just people who are super nurses, kind of, like they can work anywhere and they can do anything because they've learned how to do ICU and ER nursing. That means everything that's not as critical as that means they know how to do that too. And that's a misconception, and it's very wrong. And it does not mean that you can function as a med-surg nurse or anybody who takes more than 3 patients. I'm definitely inadequate as a nurse when I have more than 3 patients. You don't want to give me more than 3 patients because I become helpless. And I do much better with one single patient who's on 13 different drips and 5 different things of machineries and vents and balloon pumps and Swan-Ganz catheters and everything else, you know, coding. I would be much more competent with that one patient than 4 med-surg patients. And I've learned that the hard way from being pulled and floated before. So that's another thing you can do, is choose your specialty wisely. If you choose one of those med-surg type specialties, just go in knowing you'll probably be floated, and there's not much you can really do about that. Because even as a staff nurse, my ex-girlfriend was a med-surg nurse, and it seemed like they just, from day to day as a staff nurse, they just pull you around everywhere in those units. They'll put you in one place and another place, and they just use it kind of interchangeably on those floors, and it's just very common. So anyway, that is the end of my video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it shed some light on floating and some of the different things you'll deal with as a travel nurse, and maybe even gave you some tips on how to not get floated, or how to, you know, how to figure out if you're going into a situation that you probably will be floated, and at least then you go in knowing. So anyway, see you guys later.